Hi everyone and welcome back to the Bovine. I'm your host Kara Mastel and as always, I'm happy to be here. Today's episode is coming to you from AgSmart, held in Olds, Alberta. I would dive into the details more, but Todd Ormann, Vice President of Development at Olds College of Agriculture and Technology, is today's guest, and he does a fantastic job of diving into what the educational day all entails. Todd, welcome to the Bovine. We just came off the 5th annual AgSmart. Tell me a bit about the two-day event.
Yeah, sure. AgSmart is an agricultural exposition. So I would say it's a bit like a field day on steroids. Like it is different than an AIM or an AgriTrade, which are kind of large sales events. This is much more of an intimate event where we try to download information and have it more educational content, right? So while there are vendors there that, talk about their products, I think a lot of key there is a much more customer intimacy where you have that ability to, have a seminar on various topics. So we had about 44 different seminars and then a number of field demonstrations, right? So then you can actually see the drones flying, you can see the autonomous equipment moving, you can see the sprayers go out there and basically work with the sensors, right? So it is much more of a learning exposition than it is a sales exposition.
There was about five different tents this year going on simultaneously. So it really makes an interesting. You can pick and choose. You don't just have to be from a grain farm. Or you don't have to just be from a feedlot or livestock operation. It's really kind of a full encompassing event.
Yeah, it is. And even on top of that, like it definitely has that content for farmers and ranchers, but it also had a bit of content too for, those ag tech companies and some of those smaller ones, right? So we had seminars on entrepreneurialism as well, and some of those challenges that kind of come into play. So yeah, there's a lot there to kind of download and learn, right? I also know like groups like AFSC had a plated dinner where they had speakers come in, you had Alberta Grains had their field days. So they were able to download information on their varieties. So again, I don't know if you remember, what was it called in Edmonton? It used to be the old farm tech.
Yes.
I would say this is probably closer to a farm tech than it is to, AIM or AgriTrade, right? Because it is about going to learn and understand and have that discussion than it is about, kicking tires.
And what year of AgSmart are we on?
We are on the 5th year. And so, it kind of had a little bit of a rough patch there when we first started and we went through COVID, but it continues to grow. And this last year actually, again, was record numbers. I think we had roughly about 3,600 people come through from an attendance perspective. That was up 15% from last year. And last year, I think it was 10 or 15% up from the previous year. So it seems to be hitting its stride. It is becoming actually a fairly major production.
Do you see attendees being mostly local? Like, do they see it as a local show, or you're seeing people from everywhere?
It's probably the small scale an Alberta show, right? A little bit to Western Canada. There's no doubt the participants, that bring the content are probably prairies or Canada-wide, right? There's groups from Saskatchewan, Ontario, you name it coming in, some, foreign. I think even this year we had 16 different countries actually there.
Amazing.
Right? Yeah. So there was a lot. Like I remember we have one researcher from Nigeria, right? He was a star of the Nigerian group, to be honest. Like, that was, we had a group from there as well that came through and showed, came to the film, came to all the pieces. But you have a lot of content coming from all over the place now. The other one too I find really interesting there is Australia. I don't know why. Well, I kind of do. Australia probably is the closest fit to Western Canadian agriculture. So you see a lot of livestock and a lot of other solutions coming from that part of the world.
They've learned how to deal with things like drought and hot weather, and that I think they've brought some interesting tips and tricks down our neck of the woods.
Yeah, exactly.
So how has it evolved then in the way, like you talk about how it's grown, but has the direction kind of changed? Because within that time, Olds College also has been through a rebranding. It's now Olds College of Agriculture and Technology. So has AgSmart changed in that way too?
Yeah, I mean, AgSmart, if you look at it, I would say the initial focus was really much on that digital technology, and it has definitely broadened to more of a more broader technology that you see, right? So one of the areas that have grown a lot in AgSmart is the seed side. So you definitely see a lot more seed plots there, and again for cereals and barley and pulses and things of that nature. So that definitely had grown. The technology also kind of transformed from just a digital asset to, hey, some big iron, and how that iron utilizes that digital technology. So those have become key focuses of that as well. And then the final piece is because what was driving a lot of that industry was some of those small, medium enterprise type of companies. Then that entrepreneurial piece also then kind of weaved its way into the show. And you've got groups like Cultivator and Tallgrass and SVG Thrive all participating in the show, right?
So talk about the student aspect, the smart farm. How does, well, actually, maybe let's back up a bit. Talk about the smart farm, what it is, and then we can kind of go into how it plays into AgSmart.
So if you look at the smart farm, right, it is, I'd argue if you just look at Olds College itself, like one of our unique pieces is the fact that we can do both research and education at scale, right? So we have 3,600 acres of farmland, 1,000 head feedlot, 100 head of cattle. We have the sheep. We have all those assets that allow us to both teach and do research at scale. And that's the unique piece. And sometimes, I'll be honest, Kara, that I'm sometimes I'm hesitant to use the word farm, right? Because we really aren't farming that land. It is really an asset that enables that research and that education. And so we can simulate a real world environment that kind of, that can basically showcase that. But we are taking unnecessarily risks or unique risks, and we're really thinking about the research result, and we're really thinking about the result from an educational perspective. And so it isn't this independent farm that we farm. It really is this asset that we have leveraged and integrated into both our research and into our student experience. And that integration of that asset allows us to do some things that are pretty unique from an educational institution.
And lots of that is showcased at AgSmart as well. That was, I know you guys have a whole tent, and it's always super fascinating to go in there, walk around, and see exactly what you guys are all working on, because there's a huge variety of things there too.
Yeah, there is. And I guess, when you do, especially the kind of research we do, so we would do applied research. So we're not discovery research, right? So if you compare us to a university may want to actually start from the ground up and build something. We are much more economic development in nature. So our intent is to validate and test out others' technology. And so to that end, we showcase that. And we don't do research then for research alone. The intent here isn't just to create research and put it in some journal somewhere. The intent here is to do research and to showcase that to industry, and then help industry develop and help farmers and ranchers see that. So AgSmart, kind of fits that model. I mean, the reason we do AgSmart is we just want to, download the information that we see out there. So it is an extension service to some extent, from the college, because it is a learning piece. Again, we don't do research for research purposes. We want to share what we learned with the community, and that's what we do it. And when I talk about the community too, it is a community of farmers, ranchers, industry, even government shows up to AgSmart for learning aspects as well.
So this year it fell in the end of July. I know the dates sometimes vary, but obviously students are not in class at that point. Are they involved? Are there students involved in the process of AgSmart?
Yeah, there is. And a lot of it because we have students involved in our research farm, right? Like there's a number of students that come in our research farm and they get involved in AgSmart, and they're a big part of that as well. We did have the number of 4-H students come through AgSmart this year as well. It's not necessarily students, but the young farmers had a event on campus at the same time, right? So the much as we can expose both youth and adults, it's all about learning, right?
Now, I know another part of AgSmart is usually you guys try and tie in some sort of announcements or different things that the college is working on or the government is working on in partnership with the college. I know I've been to a couple different announcements. This year, there was one with AFSC. Do you want to kind of touch on that announcement?
I can't get into details of that because I'm not a subject matter expert on it, but there was an announcement basically on some of the new funding for youth, but I can't speak to the details of it, right, for that aspect. But again, I just don't know enough to say. But yes, the minister RJ did come on it and do that announcement. We also announced our partner of the year with Army. Like Army has been a great supporter for us. We don't have the wherewithal to go and buy a brand new combine or a sprayer and construction equipment. And Army has been an amazing partner that way. They've also provided us with scholarships. So we announced that partner of the year piece, and then we also announced our extension, and it's actually a growth of our partnership with FCC, right? So FCC put their name on our new farm shop. We have a 5-year agreement with them. They are supporting and funding a lot of the research. Because when we do research, again, what's a little bit unique with a college versus a university, we have no base grant that does our research. Like we literally have to hunt for every one of our research. So you have to hunt for a grant, and then you have to find matching funds, right? And so when we look at that, companies like FCC are really, really crucial for us because quite honestly, they sponsor a lot of research on campus, and it's their leadership that allows us to do some of those things that we just couldn't do without them.
So as you said, a lot of the topics you guys are researching, they're ones that industry is really looking for. It's that hands-on research. How do you come up with the topics? Do people like FCC come to the college and is like, hey, this is something I'm seeing, or does it come out of days like AgSmart, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I wish I had this absolutely magical answer for you. But a lot of it does depend on where the funding is, right? And so when we look at the funding, we would see some traditional things that you always have seen in agriculture, like, crop health, animal health, right? But I do think you're also seeing a lot more research that is funding that is focused on the environmental stewardship, right? Data sciences. And so to that end, those are things that drive it. Now, we still always have to have an industry partner involved. So that does make sure that research is always relevant, right? We would see anywhere between a 20 to 60% contribution from, or, and again, if it's a large company, they may be paying for the full shot that's coming from the company. The rest is going to come from core grants like CAN, ARDAR, Alberta Innovates, NSERC. And so where they're having their need for the funding is what's driving that. It is interesting, because at AgSmart, I had to do a bit of a presentation just on this. And, I think as an ag community, we always have to think about where those influences are coming from, right? And I know agriculture focuses a lot on efficiencies. That's been our bread and butter. But I do think we have to consider that food is much more of an experience. And when we start thinking about where those influences are coming from, and you see that in our funding, that consumer influence is looking for an understanding of the environmental impact. They are looking for, that understanding of how we can track and trace some of these things. And so when we look at our research dollars and some of those focuses are there. So, I do think AgSmart is also a place not just to kind of download like a traditional production mindset, but also to have some of these conversations and some of these trends that are kind of coming and hitting the farm, and kind of recognizing that, that there definitely is an urban influence that is playing a major impact on the farm. And, it's something I talk about quite a bit when we do tours here at the college. There's only about 1.3% of us left. And so when we think about our policymakers, everything else, they may not come from the same background as us, right? And so they're getting their information and their votes from that urban audience. And so we should expect that is going to have a bigger impact and influence. And definitely the college, I feel, is a bit of a bridge. So we can tell the ag story, but we can also maybe help tell the consumer story a bit to the ag community. And AgSmart allows us to do that.
Absolutely. And I know I had some conversations at AgSmart too, just walking around asking people, okay, so what are you learning? What are you seeing? And a lot of people said, AI is going to take over the world. That's one of the trends, and we all know that. But I heard a lot of discussion on carbon credits and how on earth we monetize them, things like that, and how we actually, like you said, trace those values. So absolutely, I think that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, like, I'll give you an example. One of the projects that we look at, I think, is interesting. That we have these chambers that measure gases that come off the field, right? And that project went out and basically showed what a 30% reduction in fertilizer versus the right amount versus 30% not enough, and what the impact was on those. And our VP of research, she would tell you that we grabbed as much data in a day than she used to get grabbed in 3.5 years when she was doing her PhD research, right? And it's, long story short on that, there was no difference between each of those applications from that perspective of what gases come on the field. But it was not because fertilizer doesn't have an impact. It's just a factor, not the factor in that, right? So again, I think some of those research is good to understand what that means, and then also provide that data both from a farming community, but also to other communities to show that what the potential impact is if we did reduce fertilizer, right?
So do you see a lot of students coming from the perspective of, they go to school and then they come back and work on the smart farm, or are a part of AgSmart or a part of the college afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of the actually staff that we have are graduates from Olds College, right? Mm-hmm. And so they bring some of those pieces in. For example, like one of our, he wasn't one of our students, but again, one of our researchers is going to be a future son-in-law of mine, right? And so Ash, he's from Fiji. He comes with a math background. I don't think he would have looked at agriculture, but his future father-in-law works at the college, so I had him apply for a job. And Ash has gotten into a lot of the data science work that we were done with our robotic platforms, everything else. And he's been out in the field, with the Omni platform, with the various systems, and has got a really good sense of data and what its impact is going to be on ag. And I do think, when we think about our students and where we're going to come from, there's going to be a lot more diversity going forward, because we're probably going to have to attract from non-traditional sources, right? And again, I think the college is a good place to kind of disseminate that information and bring people like that in to kind of help out and get a good appreciation of what ag really is. Yeah. And so our students, the same thing. Okay, I just tell that story because, again, I just find that as a interesting bit of an extreme version of where potentially our future students are going to come from.
Well, and as we address labor shortages and all these different issues that we have in industry, that's crucial. And there's so much overlap. I think so many people think you have to grow up in a farm like they would never even consider agriculture because they didn't grow up on a farm and they grew up in the city. But man, you can, like you said, you can be a mathematician, you can be into data analytics, things like that. And there is so much in ag with that.
Yeah. Julie is another good example. Like, Julie's background, I think she comes much more from a tech background. Her partner was here in Olds. She went to college here at Olds, started playing around with machines, and now she's been one of our core operators, right? Again, a non-traditional background. Now, that is mixed into our research farm with people, honestly, that grew up on the farm, have a good background, PhDs in engineering, agronomists. All those things got to kind of come together to make that work. But yeah, more and more so, I think that's what you're going to see. And as you know, if you start thinking about that future of ag, as farms get larger and more complex, the industry around it is getting much more complex. And so I think about 63% of our students, are probably going to go into industry first. And they're not necessarily going back to the farm and ranch. The bigger opportunity, I think, for a lot of these people is that for every farm, there's probably a half a dozen people or a dozen people supporting them. And they are going to have to be very technical in order to support that.
Any trends you're seeing in agriculture right now that you guys are really focusing on at the college? Obviously, technology is a big one.
Yeah, I mean, technology is a big one. But there's some that are always there that are going to continue. Farms are getting larger, more complex. The labor issue continues to be something that we're all concerned about. At the college, it's not our challenge to find these kids jobs. The challenge is to find the kids to come into the programs. So that's an ongoing challenge that we're going to look at. Is the world going to get more digital? Absolutely. You think about that future of yield. It's not about applying just the right herbicide or seed variety or fertility methodology. It's about looking at that small piece of dirt within that field and then optimizing that, right? Like ideally, you're going to get a data layer for seeding, followed by a data layer for spraying, followed by that data layer coming out of the combine, and you're going to correlate all that and analyze that to basically optimize yield. So much, I think, of that future yield is going to be determined by understanding what you've done and applying some equation to it to drive it. And so to your point around AI is probably the ultimate approach to that. Now, even in some of my history and some of the companies I've worked with and at my background in TELUS, you were seeing machine learning play in those spaces. You have seen some of those modeling kind of working out for disease and insects. You are seeing some of that modeling. And even here at the college, we have developed some AI that is now forecasting what that nitrate level could be in the field based upon models and looking at that satellite imagery. So those things are clearly coming down. And then on the other side of AI, there is more the AI that is becoming more of a, like your chat GPTs, which is much more of a language-based AI, right? Which you could see very quickly out there where instead of talking to a person, you may be talking to an AI bot, that is providing. I know there are a number of companies playing that, but I think there's even a bigger space for AI in ag kind of going forward. And even though some people challenge like you will always hear the challenge about adoption in ag, and there really is there, I still think agriculture adopts technology better than most industries, right? And it's just a good place to do it. So you are going to see AI come down. I do expect, other trends longer term is, there will be continued environmental pressure coming down. I don't care what government's going to be in place. That will be there. Yes, we are going to have probably stronger, I'm talking longer term here, labor, similar labor that you're going to find in an urban market is going to probably come into the ag market as farms get larger and more complex. I would expect to see that as well. And then, I do think over time we are going to have a bit more of a diverse labor force. Those are big macro trends, right? But those are things I think we should all think about.
So goals for the college, obviously some big exciting things coming through. Like you said, that FCC branded shop, that's brand new. That's obviously showing some growth in the college. What's next for the college?
So the biggest announcement I probably should have mentioned is honestly the new trades building. So we did get a $63 million grant, for the trades building. And so that will be one of the largest investment in agriculture education as far as I don't know how long. Like I don't know there's any other investment that large that's going to go directly to agriculture from an educational perspective. So we will be breaking ground on a new shop. New trades building, The current trades building, I think, was built in the 60s. It was meant for about 98 students. We've put through roughly 1,100 students through that building a year. Wow. Now, that's everything from the kids that come through the dual credit program to the Red Seal training that goes, for the mechanics. But it is definitely overutilized. So we're looking forward to a building that we should see opening in about 3 years' time that will be double the size of our current building. It'll allow us to move the modern equipment within it. It'll continue to allow us to work on those, $1.2 million combines with 32, systems on it. So we're looking forward to that.
And what a time to be investing in, like you said, a trades building like that, because as technology is just continuously changing and you never know what's going to be in that building in a few years.
You don't. And again, I find it interesting because we just talked about, how big machinery is getting everything else. Honestly, we could instead of working on one, massive sprayer with 125 boom, we could be working on 25, drones instead. That really could be the potential 5-10 years down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Or even you look at like the OmniPower. So for people that maybe aren't familiar with the OmniPower, it is an autonomous machine, right, that basically you can attach implements to it. So I wonder sometimes if there's a trend there as well, that we have one machine in the future that you attach all the implements to.
Yeah, I know that. So that's an interesting case study. And I was just talking to someone literally a half hour before this on that. So that that platform is not going to be commercialized.
Okay.
And I find that interesting because we, for about 3 or 4 years, we had that on our campus. We did a lot of spraying, a lot of seeding with it, a lot of spreading, and it worked very well. And I love telling the story of, we've got a researcher by the name of Yevgen that goes back and forth to the Ukraine and teaches drones to the Army. He physically seeded the college from the Ukraine one time, right? Like he, just tells you how that works. But it also tells you that sometimes it's not about technology, it's about people's ability to adapt to technology. At the end of the day, CNH thought that was too much of a step change to go get rid of the tractor and the implement and put it all into one, because it is an interesting perspective. And again, we would have said it operationally wise, it was really it was equivalent. It cost wise equivalent to maybe cheaper, right? Depends how you wanted to measure that. But at the end of the day, for a farmer to give up his tractor and all his implements, that may be too extreme. So instead, what you're seeing, and this is some of the additional work we're doing with CNH, is that it'll be how you autonomize the current pieces of equipment, how you will see sensor technology evolve, right? So one of the things that we'll be looking at is like this Augmenta sensor, which should in real time measure the crop canopy as you go across it. So in theory, you could be, thinking it's about creating a prescription beforehand, jumping in the machine, and as the machine goes across, it will basically create the prescription. So that's the type of sensor that we're looking at there, right? So we'll see where that goes. Clearly on the drone side, you definitely see that picking up steam, right? You see farmers trying to adopt that from a spraying. Yes, there is some definitely regulatory hurdles here in Canada that still have to get, taken care of, but that technology continues to evolve. You see swarm technology coming there. Who knows? Maybe in the future, a sprayer doesn't go out, kind of in a seasonal base. You just have drones continually monitoring your crop and spot spraying. We'll see.
Absolutely. And I mean, you do see, I think there's been a little bit of move on the regulatory, like I think the PMRA actually went ahead with a certain active ingredient. So we're getting there.
We're getting there.
But
we're
yes.
definitely getting there. But the Europeans and the Americans are much farther ahead than we are. But you're right. We are getting there.
Anything on the livestock side that you're really looking at when it comes to trends or maybe technology or anything like that?
Yeah, so there's definitely areas around that we would see from a feed perspective, like again, like how you're going to feed and how that from the genetic perspective, what genetics correlate better for what feed, feed from an environmental standpoint, like there's definitely those pieces coming out. But I also like what you start to see in terms of again a lot of the imagery based pieces, like you'll see for example like a 1 cup AI, right, which I find really fascinating because it will identify each individual animal through imagery. It can look at where that cattle is in its cycle. It can start identifying trends if that animal is looking like it's lame or moving, and it's going to be 24/7. Right. So, we've had that up in our feedlot. We've had it for some time. And again, if you visit some of the larger feedlots, you still got a guy or a cowboy on a horse going up and down the feedlot looking to make sure everything's safe. Well, 1 cup AI is a good example where it may actually work really well on that. And there's some technology that I think is becoming vetted and becoming stronger and stronger and stronger as we go forward. You definitely see other unique handling systems coming in play. Again, I've seen other remote sensing pieces and tags that are starting to play, that could, I call it a Fitbit for a cow. I don't know if that's the right way to describe it.
Yeah.
But, they kind of have that. And you are seeing, today, yeah, those tags may only fit for, the purebred animal and maybe your higher valued animal. But some of those things are coming down and they are playing with that as well. Virtual fencing is another thing that you definitely see kind of out there and getting better to work with. And then again, they're even looking at what some of those connectivity solutions may be where quite candidly, there is just nothing there, right? So a lot of pieces coming down on the livestock side as well. And I also find it interesting, again, like, we talk about AgSmart, again, in Australia, like there's just a few things there that we've been playing around with. And a lot of those solutions kind of come there. again, one side story, I always found it interesting. One of these guys that developed this tag actually grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, but lives in Australia. And I still remember having a conversation with him, expecting an Australian accent and getting caught off guard when he liked the Edmonton Oilers, right? So anyways.
Yeah. Well, and I think some of that technology is fascinating in the ways because, you look, okay, yeah, you might still have the cowboy, but he or she is never going to be up for 24 hours. Like, as much as we try, there's some things we just can't do, right? That the technology can do.
Exactly. And so that monitoring of that and the measuring, like, there are companies, out there that I have a lot of respect for, like, Feedlot Health, they measure things by the pennies, right? Like those data systems basically measure ROI. You understand exactly what the feed's doing, exactly what the drug's doing, and it's complemented honestly with very good subject matter experts that can deliver that, right? And so technology is definitely going to be there. And just like I described on the crop side, data becomes really, really important when you're starting to try to measure and understand what is really driving your business.
I think the next hurdle, though, we, at least talking to a lot of producers, we have all this data, but then, okay, what do I do with it? It's now not just measuring, but now it's analyzing the data. And that's where, some of these people that maybe come from different backgrounds come in and they can analyze that data in a different way.
Yeah, and there's probably two paths to that, right? Like, again, I think that's where, like, there definitely is. Again, I mentioned, Feedlot Health. There, you are hiring a service that can measure that for you and can provide you those analytic. And so there's going to be, I think, a lot more of that. And I do see on the crop side, companies like Decisive and others, and you've got solutions coming from Nutrien, and they all have that ability to support you on that, right? And then I think, quite candidly, if you look at some of the larger farms, well, then they may be hiring the person that does that, right? We did have on campus a lot of the independent agronomists, and we had a number of the students present to them. And I was fascinated. I don't know if you remember, Kara, my background at one time, I worked for Farmer's Edge, right? And we created some of that technology. And I remember, like, the concept was you wanted to move an agronomist from doing 30,000 acres to 300,000 acres using technology, right? And we had a number of our students do a presentation to these agronomists, and I watched them describe zones and how those zones worked and how you created those prescriptions and how you utilize the data. Like, I was fascinated by, like this is like, again, I know I'm an old guy, but this is like 2014, right? So it wasn't that long ago.
No.
But these kids were describing what we wanted them to do. Like it's only 10 years ago, but they were clearly delivering that message exceptionally well, right? And so, those kids coming out of that program from Workland are doing just that, right? They have that ability to read those maps, create those zones, and not only that, communicate that, which it took me probably 5 or 6 years of industry experience before I could do what they were doing.
Okay, so AgSmart's obviously all wrapped up for this year. Planning starts probably pretty well immediately again for next year.
You're asking me a tough question now, because we're going to probably go through a bit of a change.
Okay.
Just to be upfront with you, like, it is growing to a stage where it's become very significant. So I'm too early to tell you what that next stage is, but there is something in the works there. And so my hope is in the next month or two, I can announce how we are going to grow and expand AgSmart.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I will be anxiously awaiting that. That's very exciting to see the growth in both the AgSmart and the college. So
good. And I appreciate the conversation.
It's always so great to see what Olds College of Agriculture Technology is up to. They have always something new going on, and I think it's a great opportunity to dive into some of our educational facilities when we can. Like Todd said, AgSmart is really a unique conference in the way that it's not just learning or kicking tires. It's a little of both. So if you haven't been, maybe you'll have to check it out next year. Sounds like there's some fun stuff coming down the pipeline. I am going to listen back to this and I'm going to regret using that sing-song voice, but I'm keeping it there because we are being real on the Bovine. Anyways, thanks again for tuning into the Bovine. Whether you are listening from the baler while you're out fixing fence, or hey, maybe you finally got a chance to relax and put your feet up, in which case, why are you listening to me? Anyways, so glad you're here. Whatever you're doing, we're thankful for you, the listener. If you have any feedback on today's show, you can email me, kara.m@albertabeef.org, or feel free to get in touch with us on Twitter by using the hashtag ABPsTheBovine. Now, if you're listening to us on Spotify, there is a new feature where you can click text us in the description. It will send us a message. So if you have any feedback, hey, try out our texting line. Anyways, appreciate you all. Good luck, be safe, and we'll talk to you next time.